speaker, Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
Uhuru, comrades. Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by expressing the appreciation of the party, the Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party, and our membership for your presence here and for the incredible work that the African People's Solidarity Committee has been doing for the last 36 years or so. As it has been stated, I also like to express my own personal appreciation for all of you, for the incredible work that you've been doing all this time. Comrade Chairwoman Penny Hess, Comrade Allison, Comrade Kitty and Maureen, and others of you, Sandra, with whom I've been in the trenches for an extremely long time. I'd like to express my appreciation to you, Comrade Janice, and all of you for being able to have the foresight, the vision to be here right now, because this is a critical moment in history. And you had to be able to have the vision 36 years ago to know that we were coming to this place that we're entering in world history right now. A lot of people couldn't make it, obviously. It has been stated that this year marks the 40th anniversary of the African People's Socialist Party. And it has been an incredible trek up to now, and our time has come. I think that it is important for me to say that the African People's Solidarity Committee up to now has moved beyond anything that I could have anticipated your being able to do. I've always held the view of the possibility of the real possibilities of human beings given an opportunity to be our best. And I think that when I think about the comrades in the Solidarity Movement, APSC, I see the best that humanity can be. I truly mean that. I mean that in a very subjective way. I love all African people, but I don't love every African individual. And I don't love all white people, but there are some white individuals that I can truly say that I love. And I've come to love because of a commitment demonstrated in practice to transforming this horrible place that our oppressors have made of this earth that should be shared by all humanity. 40 years we've been here, 36 years for the Solidarity Movement. When I began in this movement as a conscious agent of transformation, after having joined the U.S. Army at 18 years, just turned 18 years old, assuming that the problems that I experienced and could see in the world were based on the fact that I live in this tiny backwater of St. Petersburg, Florida. And I joined the U.S. Army at 18 years old, and I got an opportunity to leave St. Petersburg, Florida, to see the rest of the world. And on the train, leaving St. Petersburg, to go to these other places where opportunities were awaiting a bright young African, on the very train, leaving St. Petersburg during December, the holiday period, train full of people, so many people that there was standing room. And I was standing in the train and standing next to a little white guy. His name was Sailor. And suddenly he said, I hate that. And we were all going to join the military. We were all going into the U.S. Army to protect this great democracy. And this comrade standing next to me, I just knew he had something really enlightening to say. And so I said, what's that? And then he pointed to an African who was sitting there, and he said, seeing a nigger sitting next to a white woman. And that was on the train leaving St. Petersburg, where I was going to get out of here and see all these other great opportunities out there in the world. And I ended up, of all places, in Berlin, Germany. I was in Berlin when they built the wall. I was in one of the first Russian tanks, one of the first U.S. tanks that faced a Russian tank in a hostile situation. I was there. I saw U.S. generals actually trying to initiate a third war. I was there, seeing the attempts made to startle and frighten East German or Russian troops into firing a round that could do anything that could kick off another conflagration. And I was struck by the fact that despite the fact that I was in Germany, some 14 or 15 years after the military defeat of Nazism, that I experienced more freedom as an African in Germany 14 or 15 years after the official military defeat of Nazism than I had in the United States. And while I was in Germany, the civil rights movement had picked up and was challenging all of the relations of production and all the relations in this country. And I'm sitting in a tank, freezing, at Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin, Germany. And this propagandist comes on the radio, because we listened to the radio coming from the propagandists because they played better music than you could get from the U.S. side. And I'll never forget this woman saying that the name of this next song is Peace Down South by Louis Armstrong. She said, but of course there has been no peace down south since the civil rights movement has begun. And this and other things that I'd see, I'd witness that the battles that I would have in Germany was not with Russians or East Germans or West Germans, but was with white people who had come from America, who had created their own segregated reality. And on a regular basis, Africans and white GIs fighting all over West Berlin. Didn't make the news. And this became a part of what I began to understand. And I was so lucky to have been there. I was so lucky to have got out of St. Petersburg and out of the United States and to be able to experience the United States from another place in the world. To be able to run into Africans from the continent of Africa and in Berlin, and to walk up to them and say, what part of Africa are you from? And then to get a response, and then they'd ask me, what part of Africa are you from? And I will never forget being ashamed to say, I don't know. I'm with the U.S. Army here. I was greeted by Somalians, as they were characterized, and taken to their homes for parties and what have you, and taught the difference in Somali and West African dance. And I would meet Africans from West Africa who would say, you ought to come home. It was really quite an experience for me. And then to come back to the United States, to Fort Benning, Georgia. This is the 1960s. This is the era that the Uhuru movement was born into. And to come back to Fort Benning, Georgia from Berlin, and then to experience how African GIs. I should tell you that I was also on a ship coming to the United States when Floyd Patterson, the Negro American, fought Ingemar Johansson from Sweden. Wasn't he from Sweden? For the championship. And how Johansson destroyed Patterson. And all of the white Americans were ecstatic that the white Swede had beaten this Negro American. Of course, you know, the boxing matches happened throughout that ship for the duration of the trip. But these were just great lessons to learn. Didn't come from a civics book or anything like that. This is the real world that I was experiencing. And the thing is that I was extraordinarily vulnerable because I had grown up as what they characterize as a good student. I read everything, which means that I was better indoctrinated. I was better indoctrinated than the white people who were there. I loved and was more loyal to America than the white people were loyal to America. I got in near physical confrontations with colonels in Berlin, Germany, because they would refer to Germans as Krauts. I accepted all these principles that had been thrown at me as being American ideals and believed in them more than the Americans believed in it. And then I got to Fort Benning, Georgia, and I would watch every weekend that these African GIs would go into town on pass and come back blooded up, beaten by cops and things like this. And as I mentioned, the civil rights movement was raging throughout this country. And so I kicked off my own movement while in the military and began to write these political treatises and put them up on the bulletin boards of the battalions, of the battalion, challenging the worldview of America, challenging the treatment of African people in the United States. I wrote a 13-page letter to John F. Kennedy telling him that I had to get out of this thing, that I could not in good conscience defend this country. I couldn't defend George Wallace. I couldn't defend this America given what it's doing to African people. But of course you wouldn't understand that, I said in the letter. Being born with a silver spoon in your mouth. And so because of this and other problems that I began to create, and I did create problems for them. The problems I created, however, shouldn't have been a problem in the sense that I didn't break any laws. I, in fact, was what they could characterize as a good soldier. I could out-soldier any of them. But I became a problem because the things I would say, the jokes I refused to laugh at, and then the jokes I would turn around and tell in response to them. Because when I would go to the snack bar to buy food from this Georgia white woman who worked in the snack bar, and when I tried to pay her for the food, she would refuse to take the money directly in her hand, and I'd put the money, and she'd lower her hand so that my black skin couldn't touch her holy white skin. And that I would forcibly put the money in her hand, and then the sergeant major called me to find out what the hell was wrong with me. Said, this white woman said that you are trying to hold her hand. And I didn't break any laws. I said, Sergeant, that's a lie. Because actually, I don't like white women. I think white women are ugly. I think that white women look like fish bellies. I think that he said, wait a minute, that's all. And then asked me to leave, right? I didn't break any laws, but I became really something that was difficult for them to have around, contaminating the attitudes of all the soldiers there. And so eventually they told me they wanted me to leave. And it was a lot more involved in it. There was a Jewish guy named Stein. Because I had quit going to work. I had simply quit going to work. I wouldn't get up in the morning. Everybody get up in the morning, go to work. I stay in the bed. They didn't say anything to me. They just walked around my cot. Stein, this Jewish boy, saw this happening, and he said, hell, I think I'll do it too. Poor Stein. Because I stayed in the bed, Stein stayed in the bed. And they come right past me in the bed, and they go to Stein. You know, we own these little cots, right? And they pick the foot of the cot up and toss Stein out of the bed. Didn't work for Stein. But anyway, I was a problem because, like I said, I was a good soldier. My record was clean. But they knew I had to get out of there, and I knew I had to get out of there. And so they decided, they said, we're going to you're going to let you out. We're going to give you an honorable discharge under, what do they call it? Under some kind of conditions. Just go. And then they told me that one day, and then about a week before I was supposed to be getting out of the army, they decided they were going to court-martial me because they anticipated a problem. Civil rights movement raging, the black question out there in the air, and now they're kicking me out with a good record, etc. So they got to justify being able to do that. So they're going to court-martial me. And they lined up about 3 charges to court-martial me for things that they said had happened, some of them 6 months, a year ago. So I said, fine, I just want out. Just let me out of here. Because they didn't want to let me out under honorable conditions. And anyway, I was not supposed to beat that court-martial. You're not supposed to beat court-martials. But I did. And all the African troops in the battalion, every one of them I subpoenaed as witnesses in my trial. People I didn't know. People who didn't know me, right? And if you look out on the day of my trial, no Africans went to work. They were all lined up to testify. And by the time the trial was over, I had contaminated the consciousness of every African in the battalion. So that to have convicted me would have invited rebellion by every African in the battalion. So they said, Captain said that after all of the testimony, Captain asked me to step out while he pondered this weighty matter. Sent back for me to come back in, and I came back and he said that, well, you're not guilty. So I said, okay. I went out, and all waiting for me, all these African GIs waiting for me downstairs, and I walked out, and we're all high-fiving and laughing and what have you, and the captain is watching out of the window. So he calls me back upstairs. So I went upstairs, and I was a good soldier. I was sharp. And I snapped him, And he said, I just wanted to tell you that I know that you're guilty, but I just couldn't prove it. I said, is that all, sir? He said, yes. I said, and bounced out of there, right? And so this was the situation I got out in. I came back to this city full of rage. Never been so angry. I was angry because I was a good Negro going into that thing. I was an educated Negro. I was a good American. I had been, as Malcolm said, I had been had. I recognized that they had took me. You know, what am our forefathers? All this nonsense. I knew it by rote. Better than the whites. I used to write letters for the white soldiers and what have you, to their girlfriends and stuff like that. I understood this thing better than they did. Of course, they paid me. That was really wild. Because this is the time they're lynching black people in this country, and they come and hire me to write love letters to their white girlfriends. You know, I ain't know their girlfriends. But I got out into this. This is the atmosphere. This was the situation, circumstances surrounding my leaving the army. And when I got out, I came back to this city. And a very angry person. And in short order, I found myself attempting to join some of the existing organizations. I tried to join first the Nation of Islam because Malcolm X, you know, even in Berlin, you know, I got wind of this incredible leader, Malcolm X. And then I had a meeting in my apartment with people from the Nation of Islam. And because I said, you know, if you're going to be religious, you might as well, you know, be that as anything else if you're going to mess with it. And the thing that happened was I was sitting in my apartment meeting with these persons talking about joining the Nation of Islam, and then they started telling me about Islam and the history of Islam, and I knew more about Islam than they knew about Islam. And so I was, hey, no, that's not right. I was challenging them on this, so they got scared of me. Then, who the hell are you? And then I got scared of them because they were scared of me, right? So anyway, that didn't work. So then I tried to join the NAACP. Really tried to join the NAACP. Got involved in the little demonstrations they were having downtown St. Petersburg here. And pretty soon it became clear they were play acting. They're not trying to make a revolution, as Malcolm X talked about. They were playing. They'd go up and make some kind of deal, and they walk to the movie theater. They were, quote unquote, trying to integrate, which was crazy to me in the first place, but that's another story. And they'd walk up to the ticket and say, I want to buy a ticket. And the woman said, we can't sell your ticket. And they say, okay. And they walk around, they just go round and round in a circle. That didn't make any sense to me. So I left that, and then this incredible organization of young people called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. And they were heroic in so many ways because these were young Africans that went into places that Martin Luther King and NAACP wouldn't put their feet in. They were because of the terror that was being waged there. And not only did they go there, they stayed there and lived with the people. Whereas King would go into a place and they'd have a big rally and raise a lot of money and leave town, and then the people would catch hell. SNCC stayed there and organized among the people. And I was impressed by that. And so I organized the first Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee membership-based organization in this country, right here in this city. And it was an organization not of students, based in the African working class, right here in the city of St. Petersburg. And this is the origin of the Uhuru movement, because we adopted the Uhuru slogan through SNCC, because we were impressed, obviously, by what was coming out of Kenya, because you know the word Uhuru, the slogan Uhuru, was one that was popularized by the Kenyan Land Freedom Army, called Mau Mau in Kenya. And it was a word. Can you imagine how extraordinary it is that the word freedom would strike terror into the hearts of some people? What is this? So we adopted the Uhuru. And within a short period, we had an office up on 22nd Street here. Doesn't exist anymore. Even evidence of it ever having existed has been wiped out. Not without intent. And SNCC was an incredible movement, and it was incredible here. 1966, which was a really important year. The 60s was an important year, period, time frame. Because we had a revolutionary movement all over the world that was challenging colonialism, that was challenging white domination. It was happening in Africa, it was happening in Asia, it was happening in South America. And this movement, as I said, was sweeping the globe. Chinese talked about it as being a period where revolution was the main trend in the whole world, and it was. And I was a revolutionary, didn't know it all the time. Started off as just a civil rights guy who believed in the ideals of Americanism, didn't understand anything about how America came to be, didn't understand anything about the material basis for Americanism. I thought, like so many people think today, that ideas are somehow born separate and free from the material reality that gives rise to those ideas. And so, SNCC was the organization that I was involved in many ways as a good patriotic American. I never forget how I used to think that somehow the problem was that the good white people who lead us downtown just didn't know what the hell was going on down here. If they knew what was going on, they'd change it. I know a lot of people like that today. They excuse America and they excuse everything that's happened because of ignorance on the part of the rulers. But every time I'd go down and try to demonstrate to what was happening, they put me in jail. And it dawned on me in a cell in Clearwater, Florida, in the county jail, that it's going to take revolution to overturn this relationship that we're involved in here. That's where it came from. Not because I read Marx or Lenin or anything like that. The material reality, the material relationships that I was experiencing in the world, that my brothers and sisters were experiencing, that all the people who looked like me were experiencing everywhere. I knew they were experiencing because I could read. The National Geographic magazines, I could see them. Whereas they talked about the purity of womanhood and all these things that they were not supposed to show the modesty of woman, but not the African woman, not with National Geographic. Of course, I don't mind that now. It was their problem that saw the woman's figure as being vulgar. Wasn't a problem. Black people, those are hang-ups that Europe has had for a very long time. Still got them. So this movement was sweeping the earth. And then pretty soon, through working with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, I understood that this thing that we call racism was inadequate to explain our reality. And even inadequate is not a good term for it, because it is such a hell of a Eurocentric worldview. What a thing this is for people to explain my problem as because white people don't like me. What kind of gods must walk the planet Earth to explain to the rest of us that you got a problem because I don't like you. Because of my attitudes toward you is the reason that you've got a problem. And that the way, how do you solve this problem? The way you solve this problem is by doing everything that you can do to become as much like me as possible so that I can find you acceptable. It soon became clear to me that the solution that they offered up, like integration, didn't make any sense at all. Walking through the theater around and round in circles saying, can I come into your theater? Didn't make any sense. I understood eventually that the problem was that I didn't have a theater of my own that I could go to, and that those white people who talk to me so much about integration, they don't believe it themselves. Because they're the only ones. Only the powerless do not have the ability to integrate. Only those with power have the ability to integrate. So if they believe it, they'd move next to me, not require me to move next to them. These were things that began to, this is the real world that I'm talking about. If I had gone just by what was being written, then I would have been an anti-racist integrationist. But the world is what was informing me of how it should be. And the world is what helped me to understand that the conditions that we suffer now, the people in Vietnam who are fighting like hell, they're not fighting to integrate. They're not fighting to get white people to like them. They are fighting for national liberation. They are fighting against colonialism. They are fighting to get possession for themselves of their own right to self-determination. That is what the struggle is about. That's what it's got to be about. And we learn, what is racism anyway? It is an ideological. It is the ideological foundation of capitalism, imperialism. It is the explanation that's offered to the world for why white people dominate everything and we are oppressed. And it comes at us of 1,000 different ways. It is philosophy. It is the ideology. 1,000 different ways. We talked about it before, that I like, especially during this time of year, the analogy of Santa Claus. You know? Because what you got is a situation where this jolly white guy brings gifts to all the good people in the world. He doesn't work. There are these, they call them elves, I think, who do something, but the reality is that he's in the North Pole, where it's really difficult for any kind of production to go on for prolonged periods of time. Nevertheless, without ever getting sweat on his brow, doing any kind of work, he gets all these goodies that he distributes all over the world except to the bad people. So the only ones who get stuff are the good people, and the ones who don't get stuff are the bad people. What is this except a left-handed explanation of how Europe got all the value in the damn world and everybody else is poor? Don't work for it. As George Bush said, we are good. It is part of the ideological foundation. It is the whole notion of race comes into existence around the same time of the emergence of the European nation. Europeans become nations, not the Greek race, Not the Italian race, although those terms had been used at one time. Not the German race. They become nations. And the rest of us become races. They define us as the race. We don't have a national identity. We're just races out here. And of course, what has happened is you see the consolidation of the European nation. Where does it come from? How did it happen? Because the reality is that for most of history, the people who we now know as Europeans defined themselves primarily in relationship to each other. The Celts and the Goths and Visigoths and the Saxons and all these other people who were constantly at war with each other. That's what Europe was known as, this place of warring tribes, constantly at war at each other. And then it took slavery, the so-called slave trade, and colonialism, which initially resulted in competition between all these different white groups. That's why Berlin happened in many ways, the Berlin Conference, 1884 and 85, where Europeans came together and carved up Africa and gave each other parts of it because they didn't want another war over Africa. But what began to happen is, increasingly, these people who lived in this territory began to define themselves not primarily in relationship to each other, but primarily in relationship to the rest of us. And so you have the emergence of the European nation. I don't say German nation, French nation, the rest of that, because just like you find the Ku Klux Klan in Spain back then and find them in Mississippi today, it's a sense of sameness that spans the globe. Wherever white people are, there is a sense of sameness. And part of what constitutes the nation is this sense of sameness. One, that rests upon a material foundation of economic life and economic activity. Not just any kind of economic activity, but when you look at the economy that has arisen, that's in big trouble today, you're talking about a parasitic economy that linked all the white world together in a sense of sameness, so that whether you lived in Spain or Germany or Holland or Poland, in some way or another, you were living off Africans, so-called Indians, and other oppressed and exploited people around the world, because that is the basis of the rise of capitalism, the world economy that unite the white world, consolidate the white nation in opposition to the rest of us. That's why we talk about a bourgeois nation, not just because people got a certain attitude in the nation, but because why did the nation happen? Is it because some people got together, and sometimes people did get together? Who was the guy in Italy who famously said, "We have created Italy, now we must create Italians"? This was in the 18th century, so there was a consciousness of that, but it's referred to as a bourgeois nation because it was capitalism that gave rise to the European nation. That is why it is a bourgeois nation. It is a nation in the service of a particular social force, a class force, that is the bourgeoisie. And it is a nation that comes into existence at the expense of the solidarity of the rest of the world. When we look at Africa today, it still suffers the consequence of the development of the European nation. When you look at what's happening throughout South America, it is a consequence. There were no borders in Africa before Europeans got there. There were no borders in South America, what we call South America or the Americas, before Europeans got there. These borders are property lines. And this was one of the fundamental things that distinguished Europe from most of the world, and that was private property, private ownership of land. And so these are things that we came to understand. These are like core principles of the work that I've done in terms of developing what we characterize as African internationalism. And so now we live at a period of extreme crisis. The crisis did not begin now. It started some time ago. I will go all the way back to the Second Imperialist War, the thing they refer to as World War II, and where Europe and Japan entered into this huge battle to redivide the world. There were no good guys there. You hear every now and then somebody saying the last good war of America was World War II. It was a war to redivide the world. Every airplane that left here to go fight that war, I should remind us, every factory that produced on this land to go fight that war, I should remind us, was an airplane that left stolen land. Was production that occurred on stolen land. White people are not indigenous to what we characterize as the Americas today. Nor am I. And when we talk about, Comrade Penny Hess was talking about primitive accumulation, because we need to understand this concept of primitive accumulation. Because the final analysis, the question must be asked by everybody. How the hell did the world get to be the way it is, that white people own everything collectively and most of us don't own a damn thing at all? Even though most of what white people own is owned as a consequence of some parasitic relationship they have to the rest of us. You know, we talk about slave trade. You can see that. But it's deeper than that even. We're talking about whole continents. We're talking about this land that we live on became a part of the primitive accumulation of capital. We're talking about Canada, South America. We're talking about Australia. All of these were places that were inhabited by other peoples. The wealth of the white world is a consequence of what has happened to all of this land, as well as what they did while they were in China or Vietnam and other places. You understand what I'm saying? This is the world that we live in right now. And this is the world that is under severe stress right now. If you understand primitive accumulation, you don't even have to know the details. If you understand that all the wealth came from and requires for its continuation slavery, colonialism, occupation of land, stolen lands, if you understand that, then you make a connection that the struggles against colonialism, slavery, and occupation is the reason why we see the economic crisis sweeping the world. I don't care about a damn derivative. Where does the derivative come from? There's something that Marx referred to as the fetish of what? Commodity. You know what that means? You know what a fetish is? What is a fetish? Somebody tell me. Somebody say something. Fetish. A fetish, you know, it's like a superstition kind of substituting, you know, like, say it. Like a totem pole. I mean, a fetish it's bestowing on some kind of object, some supernatural or other characteristic to it. And people like to talk about Indians and other people having these fetishes and how silly that is. But one of the peculiarities of capitalism is commodity production. And by commodity production, what we simply mean is that everything that's produced is produced for the market. In other words, it's produced to sell. It's not produced because somebody needs it, because it can be sold. And what happens is, because it's produced for the market, when, as opposed to the old days when somebody made some shoes and then took it to this marketplace where they traded it with somebody for some eggs, when that happened, you understood that you had a relationship between people, didn't you? That was very clear. You had a relationship between people. You raised a cow. Remember the story of Jack and the Beanstalk? Where Jack's mother sent him to the market to get some beans and to buy something, and he came back with these magic beans. His mother threw them out the window and what have you. Because Jack didn't get a good deal when he went to the market. Well, the thing is that when you have that kind of relationship, it's clear that it's a relationship between people. Because his mama could have told him, go back and get those money and take those beans back to this guy. And she threw them out the window. So, but what happens when you produce for the market, for sale? When you produce something, the person who produces it loses absolute control of it. The producer loses control. Somebody works in a Ford plant, produces a plant, it goes someplace, it shows up in a showroom here in St. Petersburg, Florida, or some other place. There's no relationship to it. When somebody wants to buy it, they don't take a herd of cattle down to the Ford place and say, look, I want to trade 14 cows, heifers, and this bull for a Thunderbird. You know? The relationship between the people has now gone. You don't see that relationship between the people. So we bestow these special magic qualities on the product itself. That's why he talked about the fetish, because the relationship between the people disappears. Marx also talked about the primitive accumulation of capital. We just talked about that. It is the starting point. It is slavery. It's me. It's this land. It's all these things that happen. But this, too, is a situation where it functions similarly to the fetish of the commodity. Because it is a category, it is a characterization that removes from visibility the relationship between peoples. And so there's somehow some assumption here that when you look at what they call America, or when you look at what is produced here, it comes from some other mysterious place. There is no connection made in the brains of the people who live here in most of the world. I hear people talk all the time about, no, I don't hear them talk all the time about what they did to the Indians, because that's something that doesn't get discussed in polite company. But what happens is people are able to talk about the misery and oppression of people around the world and not connected at all to imperialism, not connected at all to the fact that it wasn't like that for you brought your ass there. Somehow, this thing that we characterize as primitive accumulation functions similarly to the fetish of the commodity. And it disappears from the consciousness of the people. So that you can go today, go look at Uhuru News and read some of the comments by white people who are explaining the misery and poverty of Africans on the continent of Africa, who oppose the struggle, who oppose the revolution, who oppose to overturning this system. It's got nothing to do with whites coming and stealing South Africa, murdering thousands and thousands and millions of people. It's got nothing to do with the fact that there is a highway of bones stretching from Africa all across the Atlantic Ocean to these shores. The conditions of black people has nothing to do with that. the situation of perpetual brutality, perpetual, non-ending brutality. There has never been a time since we've met Europe where we haven't experienced daily brutality of some sort or another. Daily brutality. Physical brutality. When I say physical, I'm talking about a situation of the 2 million people in prison today, half of them being African. Physical brutality. Brutality that would stick African children in prisons for 50 years, 15, 20 years, when they know that that child is going to be raped. Intentionally they do it. Not some accident, not some hapless politician who just didn't know what he was doing. Not this nonsense Bill Clinton talks about, well, I made a big mistake what I did in Haiti and Rwanda. They know exactly what the consequences are going to be. Not just for the people who they put in prison, but for the communities that they come back to, the communities that they left from. The terror that African women suffer, knowing that their sons will meet those consequences. On a daily basis, all African women suffer that. Whether they are aware of it or not, you live with it every day. You kind of forget about it because it becomes the norm. Perpetual bludgeoning, the removal of a sense of self, the attack on a sense of worth, to wiping clean the consciousness of our own history. This is something that Africans live with every day. And not just Africans here, but around the world. So in the 1960s, to return, in the 1960s, and I know I'm probably approaching my time limit. 1960s, you saw this in magnificent movement spreading up everywhere. Crisis began in the 1940s. Struggles for national liberation because Europe preoccupied with this war among themselves and Japan. This preoccupation allowed for certain political space to emerge, so that struggles for national liberation began to happen everywhere. This is where the crisis really begins. Struggles for national liberation result in China in 49 becoming free, India 47 becoming free. Revolutionary activity happening all throughout South America. 59, you see Cuba becoming free. 54, the Mau Mau revolution is happening in Kenya. In the 50s, Ghana becomes free. Revolution, this is the beginning of the crisis. And at this point, the Europeans fall back on what they characterize as neo-colonialism. It becomes necessary. Because everybody around the world is saying, kill the white man, chase the white devils into the seas. And so neo-colonialism becomes indirect rule because white people cannot directly hold down the world the way it used to be done. And then there are special Negroes who usually they put in places. These are the Negroes they've sent to the universities and made them just like I used to be. Only Negroes who could go to school. And these they put into places so they could become heads of what they call these free governments. But even when they're supposed to be free governments, the Europeans still control the resources there. They still own them. The mines were still owned by white people. If there was a factory, still owned by Europeans, etc. And so through controlling the economy, they were able to control the politics. All over Africa, not just Africa, it happened all over the world. That's what the Vietnam was about, overthrowing neo-colonial puppets that had been put in place there. That's why when Kennedy was killed and Malcolm X said the chickens have come home to roost, he was talking about what Kennedy had done to assassinate the South Vietnamese puppet that they had put in place there. So neo-colonialism became the means by which they would rule. That's what Batista was. In Cuba, a neo-colonial puppet, but they become the models. Everybody should act like them. To be civilized, you must be like Batista. You must be like Somoza in Nicaragua, who represented U.S. interests there. They become the idealized native, the civilized native, the honorable native like Mandela, who loves everybody. Yeah, you can put me in jail for 27 years, do everything you want to, kill all my people out, but I love you. I'm not angry at anybody. That's a psychopath. Something's wrong with that Negro. Remind me of Bundy. Y'all remember Bundy? Yeah. So you had this neo-colonial thing, this crisis, and they fell back on neo-colonialism. Then you began to see the crisis of neo-colonialism with Fidel, with the Sandinistas. And you see the crisis of neo-colonialism with forces like Hugo Chavez and Evo Morales. You saw the crisis of neo-colonialism even when you saw forces like Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba, all of whom were targeted by imperialism. Create this nasty image of them and murder them if you can. If you can't murder them, then do whatever is necessary to overthrow them. But the crisis was there. 1970s, James Earl Carter is president of the United States. And this is where you see this man who worked for him as National Security Advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, talk about an arc of crisis from El Salvador to Iran. Iranian Revolution, 1979, where the Iranians took back their country from the U.S., who controlled it through the Shah, who they put in power after they overthrew the elected Mohammad Mossadegh in 1950s. And then the Iranians became the mullahs. I'll never forget how this white feminist, after the Islamic Revolution, this white American feminist hopped on an airplane. Now, she was famous at the time. And she was going to go there because the Iranian mullahs were making the Iranian women dress in Islamic attire. Where the hell was she when the Shah had a basement full of people who were being tortured on a nightly basis? That's pro-imperialism. She loved the women so much now. But as long as they were subject to the brutality of U.S. imperialism through the Shah, it was all right. You know. So this incredible thing happened, and the U.S. was able to stymie some of it, but the crisis has been continual. And so much so that George W. Bush, was the latest response to it, was up until his election. And the so-called neoconservatives. And when I say neoconservatives, some people talk about the neocons like they're some kind of extraterrestrial people or something like that, but they ain't. They represent a line of thought from the thinking representatives of the bourgeoisie. That's how they get there. I can't be there. They represent a certain line of thought from the bourgeoisie. And the assumption there was that they can create what they call, they're going to democratize the world. They're going to make it in U.S. image. And they're going to do it by force of arms, and even came out with a strategic outlook that said that America is the most powerful country in the world. That if we will do anything necessary. This wasn't hidden. I'm not talking about something speculated. I'm not talking about something you can only find in bizarre places on the internet. This was in the regular bourgeois newspapers, television, that the strategic outlook was: one, America is the most powerful country in the world; two, that if any force, any region in the world seeks to challenge the hegemony of America, America will attack it; and then three, if necessary, America will attack it unilaterally without anybody's participation at all. That was what informed their strategy. That was the strategic outlook of the Bush regime. Isn't that something? That's incredible. But it was an outlook that it intimidated a lot of people because, you know, America has the largest military budget, more arms than the whole world collectively. So even people who were supposed to be allies were scared as hell. They couldn't say too much. And the only people who gave them courage to say something was who? Who made them courageous? The Iraqis. Because the Iraqis showed that Mao was right. Imperialism is a paper tiger. Because with all the guns and all the bombs and everything, all the drones and everything they got with the assassination, the lynching, with the attack of the country and the lynching of its president, the Iraqis still ain't stopped putting smoke up their behinds. The Iraqis still kicking their butts. They went to Afghanistan. The Afghans helped to convince the world, too, that you can deal with these guys. An impoverished country. Do you know that when you count all the resources that they took into, like they're leaving now, Iraq. Don't let anybody convince you that they wanted to go. They did not want to leave Iraq. They were going to transform Iraq and the whole Middle East. Does anybody remember that discussion? How they were going to use this to transform the entire Middle East? And they went in and captured and murdered, lynched. The president of that country is in chaos since. And in leaving, they're leaving something like a so-called U.S. embassy for 18 to 20,000 people in the embassy. I should say something like, remember the Alamo, but it... That's going to be a lot of people that they can't get back. That's going to be a lot of damn people, boy. And then, of course, the situation in Afghanistan, that they got a problem in Afghanistan, too. I had a friend once who told me about this big guy picking a fight with him. And the big guy jumped on him and was really beating him up. And he had a knife. And he didn't want to kill the guy, so he held the knife in a way about only a quarter of an inch or so of the blade was out, and he started nipping the guy. And finally the guy said, if you stop cutting me, I'll leave him running. And I think that's where the U.S. is in Afghanistan and Iraq. If you stop cutting me, we'll leave him running. In fact, when they left, the last troops that left Iraq, 2:30 in the morning. You understand? 2:30 in the morning. I forgot how many hundreds of trucks there were. They didn't tell the people they were leaving. In fact, they had the translators to go ahead and make the regular meetings and appointments that they like they were going to be here, right? 2:30 in the morning. Say, if you stop cutting me, I'll leave here running. And that's exactly how they left. This is what happened in Iraq. Now, so the world is changing, and I just want to share this with you, and then I'll free you. That's really what I'm about, you know. It's an interesting place that we find ourselves in. All of the thinking representatives, bar none. I ain't talking about these clowns who are in New Hampshire today. You know, I said the thinking representatives have conceded that the decline of U.S. imperialism and Western imperialism, it'll never be the same anymore. I'm sorry. 999 will not help you. You know what I'm saying? It will never, ever be the same anymore. And it's really interesting in making this concession. I was looking at something. This is a magazine, a journal called Foreign Affairs. This is one of the journals of the thinking representatives of the bourgeoisie. The people associated with Rockefellers and the Trilateral Commissions and whatever, they put this out. And because, and this is really interesting, it says that one of the most puzzling features, this is an article called The Future of History. The reason they talk about the future of history, because this is written by Francis Fukuyama. And this is a guy who wrote a book called, The End of History. And his assumption was that the Western liberal democracy had maxed it out. Once you got there, that was it. And America and Europe had achieved it. This was the ultimate. You couldn't go beyond this, right? End of history. That's what he said. It was all over. This was one of the great salvos that was fired after the collapse of the Soviet Union, you know, when the U.S. was going to rule the world. And we said it. I said it. That the only thing the collapse of the Soviet Union did, it proved one thing. One, that what actually was the case, well, the fundamental thing is that the opportunism of the Soviet Union that have succeeded in controlling the struggles of peoples around the world will be out of the way. That the opportunism, and I mean this in a literal way, those of us who were around at the time know how Soviet opportunism picked who was going to lead here, who was going to be there, denied resources of this, and raised up people who toed the line of the Soviet state. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, then it could not hold up all of these Uncle Toms around the world who called themselves revolutionaries, and other forces began to emerge. So the collapse of the Soviet Union is what freed up forces like Hamas and all these other revolutionary forces around the world. So they didn't come quoting Marx and Lenin, they was quoting Muhammad and all a bunch of other stuff, but the objective was to end this relationship they have with imperialism. So this is what Fukuyama says. He says one of the most puzzling features of the world, one of the most puzzling features of the world in the aftermath of the financial crisis is that so far populism has taken primarily a right-wing form, not a left-wing one. In the United States, for example, although the Tea Party is anti-elitist in its rhetoric, its members vote for conservative politicians who serve the interests of precisely those financiers and corporate elites they claim to despise. But so do the Wall Streeters. I'm telling you, watch and see how they go for the Democratic Party. Well, I'm telling you, the Wall Street movement is going to be in Obama's pocket by the time of the election. Watch and see if I'm not, unless Obama commits some horrible offense on television, you know, like raping a baby or... There are many explanations. There are many explanations for this phenomenon. They include a deeply embedded belief in equality of opportunity rather than equality of outcome, and the fact that cultural issues such as abortions and gun rights cross-cut economic ones. But the deeper reason a broad-based populist left has failed to materialize is an intellectual one. I unite with that. It has been several decades since anyone on the left has been able to articulate, first, a coherent analysis of what happens to the structure of advanced societies as they undergo economic change, and second, a realistic agenda that has any hope of protecting a middle-class society. The main trends in left-wing thought in the last two generations have been, frankly, disastrous as either conceptual frameworks or tools for mobilization. Marxism died many years ago, and the few old believers still around are ready for nursing homes. The academic left replaced it with postmodernism, multiculturalism, feminism, and critical theory, and a host of other fragmented intellectual trends that are more cultural than economic in focus. Anyway, you get it, don't you? You get it, don't you? I mean, that's what we've said all along in terms of this left. This left can't go any place, but we have an explanation. And that's what most of the 40 years of activity we've been involved in has been providing. But there are some people who are doubting Thomases. This is Second Chance. This is by Brzezinski. I mentioned Brzezinski. Brzezinski is the one who credited with architecturing the demise of the Soviet Union. He's the one who they said suckered the Soviet Union into where? Afghanistan. And once they got into Afghanistan, that's where they used all the treasure and everything else they had, and they if you stop cutting me, they left, I'll leave you running. And they got out of Afghanistan. So this is, just want to share this with you, if I can find it quickly. I feel like a preacher up here thumbing through. This is what Brzezinski says. The foremost geopolitical effect of global political awakening is the demise of the imperial age. Is the demise of the imperial age. This is a thinking representing the bourgeoisie. This is not something somebody found the lost diary of Che Guevara. This is one of Obama's most serious advisors. Empires have existed throughout history, and in recent times, American paramountcy has often been described as a new global empire. This is something of a misnomer, implying basic continuity with previous imperial systems, but some similarity is undeniable. And that makes America the focus of anti-imperial sentiment. Imperial stability has historically depended on skilled domination, superior military organization, and ultimately, most important, political passivity on the part of dominated peoples against their less numerous but more assertive dominators. Isn't that something? The British at one point controlled India, and he's talked about only with 4,000 civil service and etc. But then, let me just go here with you, where he talks about how the longevity of empires has shrunk dramatically of late. More importantly, it suggests that in our time, the exercise of international influence is likely to be both too costly and eventually counterproductive if it comes to be seen by others as involving a reversion to imperial domination. Therein lies an important lesson for the world's currently dominant power. The only way to exercise leadership is through subtle indirection and consensual rule. America's model is neither the Roman nor the British Empire, etc. Said the paramountcy of any power will henceforth come under mounting pressure for adaptation, alteration, and eventual abolition. The dynamism of a populist nationalist awakening on every continent, involving the empowerment of the hitherto largely passive majority of humanity, signals not only that traditional empires have seen their day, but that heavy-handed global domination by a single state will not historically endure. Global systemic instability, moreover, is likely to be prompted in many parts of the world by challenges to existing state frontiers. In Asia and Africa especially, state borders are often imperial legacies that do not reflect ethnic or linguistic boundaries. These borders are vulnerable to increased pressure as heightened political consciousness leads to more assertive territorial aspiration. And then says the largely anti-Western character of populist activism has less to do with ideological or religious bias and more with historical experience. Western or European domination is part of the living memory of hundreds of millions of Asians and Africans, and of some Latin Americans, although in this case its sharp edge is pointed at the United States. That memory may be vague, even factually wrong, but it is part of the historical lore that defines the political content of the new self-awareness. In the vast majority of states, national identity and national emancipation are associated with the end of foreign imperial domination, an ending often portrayed in heroic epics of selfless sacrifice. This is true of such large and increasingly self-confident states as India or China as it is in Congo or Haiti. Anti-Westernism is thus more than a populist attitude. It is an integral part of the shifting global demographic, economic, and political balance. So, This is how they are summing up this reality. This is I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave Brzezinski alone here. But the point is that these are thinking representatives of the bourgeoisie. I mean, the end is nigh. I mean, they see what is happening. They see what is happening. This is something that I will share with you from Patrick J. Buchanan. This guy, he was speechwriter for Reagan, for Nixon. He is a pundit regularly seen on CNN, other television stuff. He is considered sort of like the right-wing, guy. And some people on the left sort of pigeonhole him as that this weird guy. But the reality is the stuff that Buchanan is talking about in his book that I'm looking at is called, this is his latest book, and it's Will America Survive to 2025? Suicide of a Superpower is the name of it. And, I mean, this doesn't sound like the confident imperialism. I mean, listen, this guy was the speechwriter for Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was the archetypical imperialist, of this era. He's the one who murdered the Salvadoran Revolution. He's the one that inflicted so much brutality on the people of Nicaragua after the revolution. He's the one who characterized the welfare queens and all this stuff that terrorized Africans. And this guy was his speechwriter. This guy told Reagan what to say. So if he were writing for Reagan today, in this preface, he says, but not only is it in the realm of economics and politics that America appears on a downward spiral, socially, culturally, morally, America has taken on the aspect of a decadent society and a declining nation. When the faith dies, culture dies. The civilization dies. The people die. That is the progression. And as the faith that gave birth to the West is dying in the West, people of European descent from the steppes of Russia to the coast of California have begun to die out as the third world treks north to claim their state. The last decade provided corroborating, if not conclusive proof, that we are in the Indian summer of our civilization. And then he says, he talks about the nation. He said, for what is a nation? Is it not a people of common ancestry, culture, and language who worship the same God, revere the same heroes, cherish the same history, celebrate the same holidays, share the same music, poetry, art, literature, held together in Lincoln's words by bonds of affection, mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone? This is what he says the nation is. Obviously, I see I'm left out in much of what he's talking about here. If that is what a nation is, can we truly say America is still a nation? Can we, and this is the question, can we truly say America is still a nation? Because he's got some problems here. The European and Christian core of our country is shrinking. That's evidence it might not be. The birth rate of our native born has been below replacement level for decades. By 2020, deaths among white Americans will exceed births, while mass immigration is altering forever the face of America. The Atlantic titled its January-February 2009 cover story, "The End of White America." Newsweek's 2009 Easter cover was "The Decline and Fall of Christian America." The statistics bear these stories out. And for the United States, as for any nation, the death of its cradle faith brings social disintegration, an end to moral community, and culture war. Meanwhile, globalization dissolves the bonds of economic dependency that held us together as a people, as the cacophony of multiculturalism drowns out the old culture. Is America coming apart? This book's answer is yes. It ain't really suicide, Pat. That's the problem. It's not really suicide, because something is happening in the world, and what is happening in the world is a reversal of all those things that gave rise to it and held it together. That's what we've been talking about. That's why we said some years ago that this is the era of the final offensive against imperialism. They just said it too. This is the era of the final offensive. Now, when people have usually talked about offensives, they've talked about that purely in military terms, like warfare, etc. I'm not talking about necessarily some imminent war, although war is on the horizon. Permanent warfare is a reality of our days, and perhaps a war of some cataclysmic proportion is on the horizon. But what I'm talking about now in terms of the final offensive is that we see the collection of all the opponents of imperialism around the world, of oppressed people everywhere, in motion. That's what Venezuela and Hugo Chavez and Morales, all that's about. That's what these struggles that we see that we are involved in as a party. This is the party that, with an incredible history. We go through the history of this party. When everybody else was dead, we stood tall. When everybody else had retreated in the face of ideological and military assault, we were the ones who advanced the struggle. That's the history of this party, right? But what I'm talking about is that there's an incredible transformation that's happening in the world, and we are in the thick of this. Ideologically, we've been leading on the cutting edge. They're talking about the left. Why the left? We know the answer to the question. We always knew that what they call the Soviet Union was not the advent of socialism, but it was a consequence of socialists taking power. The historical basis for socialism didn't exist then. What exists was the condition for socialists to take power. But pretty soon they ran into their limitations, because the difference in the Soviet Union, what they call the Soviet Union, and America and England and the rest of them, was the Soviet Union did not have the advantage of the colonies that they could exploit from all around the world. They were left out of the world economy because the world economy was primarily a capitalist world economy. We knew that. We said that. And so we're at a place now where we're in the thick and thin of it on several continents. Sometimes not strong. We're not strong here. We're still recuperating from a military assault on our revolution. We're still recuperating from having lost Lumumba, for Nkrumah's being overthrown. We're still recuperating from the murder of Che Guevara in the 60s. We're still recuperating from the death of Malcolm X, from the destruction of the Black Panther Party, from the assassination of Lawrence Mance, the co-founder of the African People's Socialist Party, from the jailings and murder that swept this country. 40 years we've been around. But we've been laying a foundation, and everybody here who is here today is here because we stayed here for 40 years. That's what's really important to understand. Because we stayed here for 40 years. Because everybody who left the struggle did not die, was not imprisoned. Because I was in and out of prison so many times, I used to read the newspaper to see where I was. But we built a revolutionary movement. And the going and getting out of prison and making struggle with every form of opportunism over the last 40 years is what helped to define who we are today. We've built movements. We are right now leading struggles, leading demonstrations in France against what the French and the U.S. are doing to our people in Congo. We are leading demonstrations in Belgium against what the Belgians and the U.S. and other imperialists are doing to our people in Congo. This party is doing that. We are leading demonstrations in the United Kingdom, as they call it. That ain't so united anymore, since more and more black people start going there, against the same kinds of things that's happening. We're in the Bahamas. We got a foothold in Sierra Leone. Sister Penny was talking about Mary Karoma and her organization. That's our organization, with more than 400 members right there and growing. And you'll get an opportunity to meet her as well. This is who we are. And guess what? This is the critical period because we see the demise of imperialism right now. Now, I'm going to say this and get out your way because this is, I think, critical in terms of understanding the solidarity movement in part. Because the African People's Socialist Party survived the 1960s, the onslaught, the murder. And not only did we survive, we never, ever went underground so nobody could find us. Right? We never left to come back when it was safer or something to that effect. Part of who we are has been shaped for the duration of making this struggle. Part of what we understand in part is because we were continually in the struggle. I know people who were here in the 1960s and went to prison and got out of prison in the 70s or 80s and think that they can start off today where they were then. But so much has changed now. And we're on top of what's changed because we've been here all along, engaged in struggle, however struggle could be made. We've been here. When we got into Oakland, California, in 1980 or so, you could see the consequences of the military defeat of our people there. Oakland was the headquarters of the basic revolutionary struggle that was happening, led by the Black Panther Party. It was like somebody put something in the water there. I mean that literally. I'm talking about people who were mentally unstable. All of the power of U.S. imperialism was concentrated. The federal government, John Mitchell, who headed the, what do you call that thing, the Attorney General, he said that by the 69 that the Black Panther Party would be destroyed in this country, and they used all the military and intelligence and other kinds of forces of this government. And it was centered in Oakland, California. There was psychological warfare that was made there. There was military war that was made there. Huey P. Newton, who later came to be recognized in notoriously bad light, went to prison for 20 years, went to prison at least 2 times a year, or went to jail. This was the pressure these youngsters were under. When I say youngsters, that's what I'm talking about. Because all of us, when we started, we were in our 20s. We had no revolutionary veterans that we could turn to for explanations or try to understand anything. It was all on-the-job training. And so when we got there, it was bad. And then we built an incredible movement in Oakland, California. And in Oakland, we initiated all kinds of programs. Comrade Gaida presided over the Bobby Hutton Free Clinic that we had there, where we had 40 volunteer healthcare workers in a mobile clinic that we went to the poorest sections of the population to provide health care. But we were creating dual and contending power with the government there. And the government knew what we were doing, so they stopped us from taking health care to the poor people there. They made it illegal for us to do it, and then they said, well, we're going to do it ourselves. They got their own mobile clinic and kept it there for 2 or 3 months after they made us illegal. The liberal white church had a clinic there on was it 90th or 98th? 98th and Foothill. And it was vacant. We said, let us use this clinic. Went to them, let us use this clinic so that we can provide health care for our community. They said, oh, fine. We think you should name it something like the Martin Luther King Clinic. No, we don't want to name it the Martin Luther King Clinic. We want to name it the Bobby Hutton Clinic. They say, if you put your foot here on this ground, we'll put you in jail. Because they want to define what our freedom means. They want to say that you can be a Martin Luther King Negro, but you cannot be somebody who in solidarity with Bobby Hutton that the Oakland police murdered when he was 17 years old, 2 days after the assassination of Martin Luther King. We had African women's child care collective. Because we recognize that one of the profound contradictions that we are confronted with in our communities is that all these women, these sisters taking care of these babies, are trying to take care of the babies by themselves. And that impacts on them in terms of social, economic, and political mobility. So we deal with this. We organize collectives. So no single woman would have to have the responsibility of taking care of her child by herself 24 hours a day. We said it before. before Hillary Clinton ever heard of it, that it takes a community, it takes a people to raise a child. And so we created that collective. And we didn't just have a collective babysitting. We had people come in, we teaching French. We had a one child who was, how old was Jamila when she could count to 50 in Swahili? You know? We had an incredible situation there. And then we had regular health care because the volunteer health care workers were coming in there to take care of them. Didn't we do that? We mobilized the movement for housing. The federal government finally got involved in the so-called homeless issue because of this party. Because this party began to take property before there was a so-called, what they call this thing now? What they call this movement now about taking houses and stuff? Some kind of occupation movement. We did this. We made it necessary. We exposed Angela Davis as a cowardly part of the imperialist movement back then. We put a measure on the ballot in Oakland, California, calling for land reform that every reactionary in the area was opposed to. That would have turned the land in the communities over to the people. That restricted the amount of money that these slumlords could take from the people. In a city where in East Oakland, more than 80% of the commercial rental property was owned by white people who didn't live there, and more than 50% of the residential rental property was owned by white people who didn't live there. We did that. And not only did the Democratic Party and the Republican Party come out against us, the Negro preachers, even a dead preacher was against us, the Negro Police Department, police organization, the Communist Party USA came out against us because they owned some of that property that was in that city. And they were protecting their own interests from the masses of African people. But this is the heroic party. When people talk about, young people think they discover something, they're talking about Pac and Tupac. Where did Tupac rehearse when he was over in Oakland, before he was Tupac? And they were Digital Underground. Where did they come to rehearse? The Uhuru House, right there, 7911 MacArthur Boulevard. That's where they came to. This is the African People's Socialist Party. We fought every struggle. We took on this whole issue of racism and white people. We were condemned by so many Negro militants because we had this relationship with the white people. Everybody got a relationship to white people. We just define ours and say what it is and then use it to advance the revolutionary interests of Africans and the peoples of the world. Here's somebody condemning our relationship with white people, and then as soon as I get off the job with the white man, I'll come over and see what I can do for you. And don't apologize for it. Because we understand the issue of race and racism. And we are involved in national liberation. We want to liberate the African nation. And we want to do this under the leadership of African workers so that we can create a new world. So that racism and things like that won't be a factor. But we understand that the condition for making this happen is the emancipation and unification of African people worldwide. The national liberation of African people. Then, when you do that, you have created the condition for the withering away of nations themselves. Because the modern nation, as we know it, came into existence as a consequence of the rise of capitalism itself. And Europe defining itself in relationship to every damn body else. We're going to destroy that. So, it's a new world on the horizon. Imperialism is dying. The African nation is struggling to rise. And what I love about it is nobody's paying attention to us. When you look at what's happening, this is what the ideology, the imperialist ideology does. You see? I went to prison for taking a mural down, an 8-by-4-foot mural in the city hall of St. Petersburg. Went and snatched it down, they put me in prison. But before we snatched it down, because it was a mural that depicted Africans in horrible kinds of ways, it's symbolic of a lot of nasty stuff. Before we tore it down, we had contemplated, we said, look, one way we can take the mural down is we can put on some overalls, and put a rag in our pocket, right, and get some ladders and walk in there while it right broad daylight. Just walk in there and then just take it down and walk out with it. That's what we said we'd do. because nobody would have paid attention. They would have been, nobody, because that's what we're supposed to be doing. And that's how everybody's looking at African people today, see? Their own ideology has trapped them into underestimating who we are and what we are going to do to change the world. So Obama puts forth the strategic view today, and I don't care what he said, they can't afford that military no more. So they're talking about cutting it by 100,000, a couple of 100,000 people out of the military. Say we're gonna get small and more flexible. Yeah, that's what you do when you can't pay the light bill. You understand? You use candles instead, right? And so they say we're going to become small and more flexible. But they said that their military, they're going to pay most of their military attention to what areas in the world? Remember what they said? Asia, the Pacific area, because they see China. And they're contending with China in Africa, and they're contending with China in Asia, and all these other places. They're contending with China in New York. And they say in the greater Middle East is what they want to concern on. They got to pay attention to the greater Middle East as they characterize it. Anybody talking about Africa? Because they don't expect to have to fight us. But we are growing all over the African world. They aren't talking about even the U.S. Because if the only movement they got is Occupy Wall Street, they don't have to worry about anything. Because Occupy Wall Street, no program, just show up and stay there. Oh, no. No demands. We got some demands, buddy. You understand? And they go back a long way, too. You understand? And the issue now is organization and taking revolutionary theory and science into the action of the most masses. Thousands of people, literally 2,000 people on one day came out in Paris, France, in a demonstration around the Congo issue. No leadership at all. No organization except us. Thousands of people in Belgium, in Brussels. Thousands of people in the United Kingdom. No organization. No leadership at all except us. Our banners, our slogans, our chants. Because we've been here for 40 goddamn years. You understand? 40 years we've been here. So I'm just going to read briefly this to you. This is from Tuesday, January 3rd, 20,000. And I don't know the exact source, but it's a man named Tom Engelhardt. Anybody ever heard of him? Comrade here has heard of him. You've heard of him too? He says, it was to be the war that would establish empire as an American fact. He called this Lessons from Lost Wars in 2012. It would result in a 1,000-year Pax Americana. It was to be mission accomplished